Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma, and addiction. My name's Ash, and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today's guest is Sara Schley. Sara is an organisational consultant for social and environmental justice, a mother, a grandmother, wife, spiritual leader, shadow worker, business entrepreneur, published author, and more. Sara also has a Bipolar II brain on the bipolar spectrum. She's kept this mostly a secret for 4 decades, until now. Sara is choosing to tell her riveting story from broken to blessed to save lives, end stigma, and optimize healing for millions. I'm beyond grateful to have Sara joining us all the way from Massachusetts today. So without a further delay, Sara, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you today?
Good. Ash, thank you so much for inviting me, and welcome to Wednesday morning for you. It's Tuesday evening still here.
Yes, I'm calling from the future. You're still in the past, and you've got this lovely little singlet on, and it looks beautiful and warm where you are.
Yes, it's middle of summer.
Oh, how divine. And what's going on over there at the moment? Is life cruisy? Is it busy? What's happening for you?
For me personally, well, it's August. It's right smack in the middle of summer. It's my favorite time. My grown kids, my college-age kids are home for about a week, and so that's fun. And it's, pace is a little slower than usual in August, so that's nice.
That sounds lovely. I am a summer baby as well. I never realized that until I moved to Sydney, which is it's much warmer than Melbourne, and I went, oh no, I really do love the sun. I find like I'm always drawn to the sun. And so I've figured out now that during the winter, I need to break it up with little getaways, whether it's Queensland or if I'm lucky enough to go overseas. But these winters here in Melbourne are starting to get quite long. So I try and break them up whenever I can.
Do it. Get a break. Get some sun.
Now, Sara, I'd love for our audience just to get to know you a little bit better before we dive into the questions here today. So can we start off with, where do you live? What does an average day look like? And what do you do for fun?
Okay. Well, thank you. I live in Western Massachusetts, USA. We've learned that's in the state of Massachusetts, not far from the city of Boston, which many of you may be familiar with. I am lucky to be, fairly long along in my career. Since you said I've been hiding this for 40 years, so I'm probably a little over than that. So I've been my own boss for a long time, and that has something to do with my bipolar diagnosis, I'm sure. So I also do a lot of self-care connected to my bipolar brain, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. So my day is get up, do yoga. I hear you're a yoga teacher. So first thing I do, I don't do anything after brushing my teeth, and then go straight up and do my yoga, which it calms me. I'm usually doing some aerobic exercise right after that. This time of year, it's thrilling to be swimming outdoors, which I do. I do long swims. Mindful of diet and exercise. And then, I put about 5 hours of work in, maybe 6, maybe 4. And right now my focus is I'm in the midst of co-creating a documentary film inspired by my book, my memoir on the bipolar spectrum. So we can talk more about that too. So the first time in my life, I'm a filmmaker. I'm working with a wonderful director named Bonnie Walsh, who's east of here in Boston, who's a dear friend of mine for many years since college. And she's a Dynamo award-winning science documentarian. So that's an amazing process that we're in the midst of right now.
Wow, that sounds incredible, Sara. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation today and just to learn from you. I had the privilege of watching your TED Talk all on your experience living with bipolar II. So for anybody that hasn't seen that, I encourage you to go check that out. But yeah, I think we've got a lot to talk about here today. As I was saying to you before we started this interview, here on Behind the Smile, the mission is to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. And to date, I've had a lot of people come onto the show and share their experience mostly with their living with addiction and how they've overcome that. Mm-hmm. But
we've had less conversations that have been primarily focused on these complex mental health conditions. And I think that's where like you are going to share with us today, there's a lot of misdiagnosis. There's such a stigma, and it's just highly misunderstood. So that's what we're going to be diving into today, and I'm really looking forward to that. Before we do, I've asked you to bring in a photo. Now, Sara, this photo is from a time in your life where you are hiding behind a smile. So you were presenting one version of yourself to the outside world, but the reality was your internal world looked very different. Could you please describe for our listeners what are we looking at with this photo and what was going on for you at that time in your life?
Sure. Thank you, Ash. And first, I want to thank you for your mission. I think it's really important and brilliant. And we'll talk more about that, overcoming stigma. So in this photo, I think I look pretty good, right? I'm smiling. We're in Florida on vacation. My kids are about 5, I think, with my husband, Joe. It's 2007. And we look like the perfect happy family on vacation in Florida. And when I look at that picture, I'm kind of shocked at how good I look, in quotes, because I know what's going on behind there is an excruciating depression. And no one would know from looking at the picture, because of bipolar, you're not going to necessarily know. You're not going to necessarily know when someone is suffering from a deep, dark depression, because you don't wear it on your forehead. Inside, it's horrific, and moment to moment is brutal, living hell. But that picture is interesting to me, because I look at that picture and I'm like, wow, that's a nice family. I know what was going on inside for me.
How long were you keeping up the facade? How long were you hiding behind that smile for?
Well, it depends when you ask. For me, and we'll go back, my first bipolar episode was at age 21. And at that point I was, kind of a rock star kid, senior year in college. I was heading to medical school. I was at the top of my game. I had a 4.0 in science. I had a bunch of feisty friends. I was a varsity athlete. You heard about this in the TED Talk. And then it was like suddenly the rug had been pulled out from under me, and I started this, spiral descent from 30,000 feet down to planet Earth in this excruciating crash. And suddenly my brain wasn't working anymore, and I was terrified, and I did not know what was going on. So you're asking how long. My depressions with my particular kind of bipolar brain typically last 8 to 9 months or longer, without any break, minute to minute, moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day, for months on end. So imagine if you're out there and you had a bad day, or you feel like you've lived in hell for a day. Imagine that times 9 months or 10 or more. And over the course of my life, Ash, I think I've had, maybe, I can't remember, I'd have to count, but probably about 10 of those episodes. So it adds up to 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
And in that time, it's hard to smile. And I remember the last one, my kids were teenagers. I'm hoping it's the last one. And so they're old enough to kind of know. And Maya was like, Mom, where's your smile? Like, that's a fake smile. That's not you. And I was doing my best to fake it, but she could pick it out, because she's my kid.
Did you feel at the time that anybody would be able to understand, or did it feel like quite a solo mission and a solo journey at the time?
I think that, all along, even the first one, I had 1 or 2 people that I felt safe talking with, who had talked with me about their issues. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been. That's the part about overcoming stigma. They were willing to share their vulnerability. One had seen a therapist, and one was going to be a psychotherapist, and I could talk to them. But I never felt like anybody got it. They couldn't tell what it was like inside my brain. And later, I could absolutely talk with my best friends and my husband. But again, it's very lonely. You don't feel like people get what's going on for you, that it's kind of a living hell. And there's no way for them to really be inside your shoes, unless they've lived through it themselves.
Yeah, that isolation and that loneliness. I can feel it even as we're just talking now. Can we go back for a moment, Sara? I'd love to understand. So you were talking that it was your early 20s where you had that first episode where things started to unravel, and to quote you, your brain stopped working. But what did life look like leading up to that? In terms of, was your childhood, was there anything that happened there that you think perhaps impacted your development or your mental health? And when did you start to notice the wheels falling off, or the spiral as you just described it?
Okay. So the spiral and the wheels falling was very dramatic. It was like overnight, boom, like a switch went off. Okay. So that there was no warning for. I did have, so my mom had severe depressions. Later, I would figure out that those are bipolar depressions, bipolar II, which is what we're going to talk about, bipolar without mania. My dad was a very strong drinker and he was a rageaholic. He never admitted to being an alcoholic, but he was a rageaholic. And so there was a lot of stuff going on in my growing up house, in addition to the love and the safety, material safety and the warmth and so many good things. There was also a lot of trauma there. So it's interesting you asked this today, Ash, because just yesterday we're interviewing this guy named Gabriel Fries, who's in Houston, Texas, originally from Brazil. We're interviewing him from the film, and his work is on epigenetics and bipolar. Have you heard of epigenetics? Do you know anything about that?
It's very limited knowledge, but I'd love for you to share. It's like,
so
because
I'm an expert that knows 1 hour worth of interview from this guy, right? So I really don't take it from me. But basically, I think a long story short, relative to this question, is that there are ways that epigenetics is not actual changes in the DNA, but it's kind of a protein that can glom onto the DNA and change the expression of that gene, right? So it's anything that can change the expression of the gene without actually changing the DNA. And what he said is those kind of traumatic events, childhood trauma, can actually, impact the epigenetics. And trauma can therefore lead to susceptibility to things like alcoholism and other addictions. It can also increase an expression of a bipolar gene that you might have inherited, if that makes sense. So I think that the trauma of my childhood, average trauma, a lot of people have trauma in their childhood, but I think that probably did to some degree influence how I've experienced it. But bipolar is the most inheritable psychiatric disease. So I'm sure it came that way. I'm sure I got it honestly that way from my mother, my grandfather, a ways back.
Wow. That's fascinating just to see how strong that genetic line is. Yeah. Tell me, you just described the wheels. I keep going back to this idea of the spiraling, and you said how quick it was, that it was almost overnight. Can you describe what were some of the things that you noticed in terms of what was going on in your brain from one day to the next?
Yeah, well, imagine a high-functioning kid who's, going to med school and getting 4.0s in science in a top university and, like I said, top of the game. And so, calculus, physics, whatever. Suddenly, it's like I can't add 2 plus 3. I'm scared to leave my room. Oh, and I'm social. I'm an extrovert. I'm scared to leave my room. I don't want to see my friends. I close the door. I turn off the lights. I get under the covers, literally. Right. And then if I am going to leave my room to try to get to class, I'm confused. Where am I? I've been there for 4 years. I know where I should be, but it's hard to navigate. And so your basic kind of cognitive function that you used to be able to do, your very high function goes to very low function, like cognitive impairment, executive function, something happens. I don't know exactly why scientifically people are studying that, but that's what it is. Later, again, in my TED talk, you remember I want to help people understand when they hear depression or bipolar depression, they think, oh, that person's sad or they're having an issue with their emotions. But why are they sad? I think what comes first is like the cognitive breakdown. So I can't do dishes, not because I don't want to, because I literally can't figure out how to do them. I can't fold laundry and sort and put away. It's too confusing. If I'm in, the grocery aisle and I'm trying to pick peanut butters and here's a big one, here's a little one, here's organic, here's not organic, here's local, it's overwhelming. You can't make those decisions because your brain is just somehow cognitively overloaded, and then you're flooded with shame. So it's like I want people to understand that it really is a cognitive breakdown. And so I tell people, if you want to know what to do, fill the freezer, pick up the kids, take them to the doctor, pick the peanut butters, because she looks good in that picture. She looks normal. Why do we have to pick her peanut butters or take her kids to soccer? You do.
Were you afraid?
Oh, it was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. The first time, terrifying, because I had no idea what was going on for me. What happened? All of a sudden, your brain's gone. I'm getting chills telling you this right now, Ash. It's been many decades. But all of a sudden, your brain's gone. You've been very reliant on your brain. You like your brain. And then it's not working. You have no idea what happened. There's no really clear, precipitating factor. And you don't know if you're ever going to get out of it.
Well, that's what I was That's what I was just thinking, Sarah. In my very brief periods of experiencing depression and anxiety, the fear that it's never going to end is what I found most crippling.
Yeah. Yeah. And as one of someone I was speaking with recently from Crest BD, their fabulous bipolar group out of Canada, she said that's when people are most at risk of self-harm and suicide because it feels like it's never going to end. And it's so excruciating moment to moment. It's kind of really impossible to explain. You try to, but there's that cognitive breakdown. There's the emotional terror. And then there's this inner voice that's telling you that you really don't need to be here anyway. Your family would be better off without you. Don't bother anyone with your problems. It's like this trickster that's lying to you and you don't know who to believe. So it's, full on assault.
And you've shared along your own mental health journey that there were moments where you were taken right to the brink of contemplating suicide. Where along your journey, because it took, 25 years for you to be correctly diagnosed? That just
25 years.
Blows my mind and terrifies me at the same time. So where along that, if you don't mind sharing, where were your darkest moments and were there many? Or was it sort of just one pinnacle?
Yeah. I mean, I think all of those depressions, so I had one when I was 21. In my 20s, I had I think 6 over 6 years. 20s were the worst, right? Because I don't know what's happening with hormones and stuff, but 6 months on, 6 months off for those 6 years, all of those are brutal. And then I had kind of a break. And then there were a bunch more around the perinatal and childbearing years. And due to sleep deprivation, other things we can talk about that now I know trigger the bipolar brain. I didn't know it then. So I can't really compare. They're equally dark. They're just trying what I've been trying to describe. Cognitive breakdown, emotional breakdown, the trickster telling you you're no good. No matter what your family says that they love you, you don't believe them, and it goes on and on. So yeah, pretty dark.
Yeah. So talk to me about the journey that you went on to get diagnosed. We just shared that it took over 25 years, but from that first episode that you experienced when you were at university or college, what did that look like?
Yeah, and that's a big reason why I wrote the memoir, Brainstorm, which we talk about more too, and why we're doing the film. The average diagnosis for what I have is 11 years. And in the interim, people are, the addicted, the suicided, the incarcerated, the homeless. And it doesn't have to be that way because with a proper diagnosis, someone with bipolar brain can live a really full, healthy, great life with proper diagnosis and treatment. So I'll answer your question a little bit.
I'm like, but why?
Yeah, exactly. Why? Because, all right. So why are we misdiagnosed? We were misdiagnosed for all those years because bipolar depression looks like regular depression. It looks like clinical depression. You come into your doctor, you look lethargic, you're suicidal, you have no joy, you want to leave the planet, nothing, lifts you anymore, you need to sleep 14 hours, whatever. And that doctor or nurse practitioner or coach or therapist says, oh, she's depressed. And then if you end up going to a psychopharmacologist, psychiatrist, or a doctor who can prescribe, they will prescribe you what? Ash?
Antidepressants.
Antidepressants. Of course, they'll prescribe you antidepressants because you look depressed. Bipolar brain like mine, the antidepressant can make you worse. Okay. Not in every case, but I think in a majority of cases, antidepressants for bipolar brain can be dangerous, was for me. So you come back looking worse. That doctor thinks you're depressed. They have the mental model, the lens, the viewpoint that you're depressed. They give you more of that drug. You get worse. You come back, they give you more. See, vicious cycle, right? And if they don't know to look for bipolar in depression, they're going to miss it. If they know to look for bipolar and depression, they're going to find it fast. Okay, so what happened? Took me a long time to be willing to go to a psychiatrist. I felt the stigma. I didn't want to be like my mother on medication. I wanted to be like you, do yoga, diet, exercise, meditation, friends, all of which are essential, necessary, but not sufficient with my brain. Took me a long time, many years, to be willing to consider medication. And in the TED Talk, I say, I wish it hadn't taken me so long. That was a lot about the stigma. But then when I finally started going to psychiatrists, my friends dragged me. The first 4 got it wrong and gave me those, the antidepressants. And how did 4 out of 5 psychiatrists not know to look? So the 5th guy who had dedicated himself to understanding the complexity of bipolar. He'd been in, psychiatrist for, 50 years at that point. He's in his 70s. He knew what to look for and he knew how to diagnose it. And he had a diagnostic scale, BSDS, Bipolar Spectrum Diagnostic Scale, that was in Jim Phelps's book. Jim is now a friend, colleague, and hero. He wrote a book called Why Am I Still Depressed, which people should get if they have that question. And Jim had this diagnostic scale in his book. My doctor knew it, used it, and in 15 minutes had me diagnosed after 25 years.
Oh my gosh. That's just insane.
Right? This is why we did the memoir in the book, because, excruciating suffering and people committing suicide and people, having their lives ruined and losing marriages and careers. And 15 minutes it took him because he knew what to look for. So you're going to ask me, what did he ask you?
Right? I would love to know. Yes.
And there's like 11 questions and I'm just going to remember like the core 4 for me. Did you have early onset before age 25? Yep. And do you have a family history? Remember, it's the most inheritable psychiatric disease. Yes, my mother and my grandfather suffered terribly. My mom called it the cruelest disease. And if you were given an antidepressant, did it seem to work but then make you worse? And I said, well, yeah, actually, my husband said that suddenly I had a hair trigger temper, and that's not me. I'm usually pretty even. He goes, okay, check. We know what you have. Bipolar, Roman numeral 2. That's bipolar without mania. Here's the script. Take these meds. You're going to get better. And he was right.
Oh my gosh. How long did it take from that correct diagnosis to getting onto the correct medication for you to start to feel like yourself again?
For me, it was 3 months. Mm-hmm. And the thing about this medication is that it has to titrate very slowly. I'm on something called lamotrigine, which is one of the go-to meds for bipolar now. So bipolar II without mania, like me, the bipolar specific medications work, not the antidepressants. That's the tricky part in diagnosis. But again, know what to look for. So because you have to titrate slowly to be safe, and it's going to depend for every different person because it's not a function of the milligrams you take. It's a function of the blood concentration. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think it's important for people to understand because they'll go, I'm on 100 milligrams and I'm not better. Well, check your blood because there's a range of blood concentration that you need. And for me, it might be 100 milligrams to get that concentration. For you, it might be 200. So in my case, I had to get up to 200. And I was cynical and I didn't believe him because I'd been 4 psychiatrists that had messed me up. But this guy, again, was such an awesome person, Dr. Michael Perlman out here in Massachusetts. And he had office hours from 9 to 10 p.m. Can you imagine? You can call your psychiatrist any day, Monday through Thursday, call. 3 days a week, I'd call him. Dr. Perlman, I'm not getting better. He'd say, we know what you have, stay the course. Click. And it was true. So anyhow, that's that. It took me 3 months. But the thing was, Ash, when I did get better, it was again like the switch flipped. It was crazy.
Oh, wow.
I happened to be I have a bunch of girlfriends and we were out. We do an annual hike or paddle. So we're out canoeing. And I'm typically the leader of the pack. So I'm typically the navigator, but I can't navigate when I have a bipolar brain. I can't even read the map. Also, I can't smile. Oh, and another a huge symptom is your memory's terrible. Can't remember it. Can't remember anything. Can't remember my keys. And you don't want to do anything by yourself. So on this trip, all of a sudden I'm navigating. Whoa, I know where I am. I'm sort of leading the pack. Then we're in the tent and we're playing this ridiculously silly memory game where you have to remember, like how many elephants were in the room. I don't know. And I'm winning the game. And my best friend looks at me and she's got tears coming down her eyes because this episode's been 16 months. And she was instrumental in helping me get out. And she says, you're back. And I'm chills telling you this again because
yeah, I've got them too.
I know it was like it was like a miracle. You cannot imagine what a miracle it is to go from that broken brain to the brain that works. It's just stunning. And you're grateful every day.
Yeah. And after so many years of thinking that this may never end and this is the reality to then coming back to yourself, the person who was underneath all of that, who was, in a way just trying to come back.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Ash, it wasn't 25 years straight. I could have a good couple years but it was that on and off. Whenever I had the horrible, and the last depression that was 16 months was so long because I was getting the wrong drugs, making me worse, making me more psychotic, more, not psychotic, that's an extreme, but more anxious, insomnia, things that I never used to have. And so that one was super long and did feel like it was never going to end.
Yeah, wow. Can I ask, I'm not sure if this is too personal, what were some of the side effects, if any, for the medication? I'm just thinking of people who might be listening today who still have that fear of medication. Just even sitting here chatting to you, I know that whatever the side effects are, being well, being healthy, being yourself outweighs that. But is there anything that people should know about?
My meds, I have zero side effects.
Wow.
I love my meds. I am passionately grateful for my meds. This is not true for everyone with psychiatric stuff. Unfortunately, some of them do have, but I'm on the lamotrigine and a homeopathic dose of lithium. And we have to be very clear that I am not a doctor and cannot prescribe, so don't take this as medical advice. But those drugs, no side effects for me, which is beautiful because the antidepressants have like sexual side effects and weight gain side effects and things like that. Lithium high dose it can be more challenging, but low dose lithium, as Dr. Phelps says, is a completely different drug because I'm in the safe range. We check my blood levels every 6 months, no problem. I'm way down low, respect to kidneys, no weight gain, no problems, which is fabulous.
That's fantastic. And like you just said, neither of us are giving medical advice right now, but if somebody is listening along today and they feel like they wanted to take that first step, would your advice be to go and see a psychiatrist?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Ideally find one who has some background in bipolar. Are you, is your audience a lot in Australia or elsewhere?
Yes. Yes.
You guys have a couple of great doctors there. And I'm not sure because I don't know my Australian geography very well, but Dr. Michael Burke's at Deakin. And
yes, that's here in Melbourne.
Oh, good. Go tell him to go see Michael Burke. He was the former immediate past president of the International Society of Bipolar Disorders. We've interviewed him for the film. He's a big champion. And I met him recently at the conference, International Society of Bipolar Disorders conference. He's stunningly good. His whole group is. Then also Phil Mitchell. Not sure which city Mitchell's in. It might be Sydney. But yeah, try to find a psychiatrist who is familiar with bipolar. And if not, you take my book and you read it and you bring it to them. Because here's an example of this is a great story, I think, wonderful story that also gives me chills. So my son, Sam, he goes off to college during COVID. And right before he leaves in 2020, he's got my book, manuscript before it was published. And he wants to read it before he goes. So I see him, he's a teenager, see him turning the pages. Is he going to read this thing? He's glued to it. Never reads it, right? A couple months later, he's out at California at school. UC Berkeley. And he calls me and he says, Mom, I need a copy of your book. I think my new best friend, Jamie, might have what you have. I'm so touched because I write this book for people who are 21 like me and could have saved 25 years. Send it out to Sam, gives it to Jamie. Jamie reads it. Jamie becomes my new best friend. He says, I was crying by page 3. Now, this is a frat brother. Okay. I'm crying by page 3. First time someone understood was like inside my brain. And then his mother gets it, Claire, and I'm telling you this because they give me permission. They're going to be in the film and they're on the book. And Claire, they're Brits. He says, me mum. So you don't think of them. I don't think of them as the most emotionally effusive. I meet her 6 months later. She throws her arms around me. You saved my son's life. Sobbing. So what did they do? They didn't have a psychiatrist nearby. They took the book. They said on page 72, I'm making that up, but this is what we think Jamie has. You know, it's this high energy, but not manic. It's severe depression. It's da-da-da-da. We think he needs mood stabilizers instead of antidepressants. So what I'm saying is you can advocate with your doctor if you don't have a psychiatrist nearby. I don't know about Australia, but we have a huge shortage here in the U.S.
Absolutely. And particularly since COVID, our mental health system is just so overrun that to get, the wait lists are just astronomical.
Yeah, here too.
Yeah.
But medication is, night and day for me. And it took me so long to be willing to accept that because of the stigma. And like I say, I wish it hadn't taken so long.
You've mentioned a couple of times Bipolar II is bipolar without the mania. Can we go into that a little bit more just to help people who are new to this concept or diagnoses, what are the key differences between somebody who is bipolar 1 and bipolar 2?
Okay. So bipolar 1, if I asked you, Ash, when you think of the word bipolar, what do you think of? What comes to your mind?
High highs and low lows.
Right, exactly. And what you're describing is what most people think and say, and that's classic bipolar 1, which is one end of the spectrum where you see the high mania and this crash of a depression. And that's actually easier to diagnose because if somebody's, dangerously manic where they're doing unsafe behaviors and then they crash, a doctor or family member can kind of see, you could see, oh, I think that might be bipolar manic depression. Let's find out. In my case, it's subthreshold mania. There's you wouldn't see those classic extreme manic behaviors like, sex sprees or staying up all night long or doing other troublesome kinds of things. I am high energy, and the sort of classic bipolar 2 personality is what they call sometimes hyperthermic, which means a lot of good mood, and so my friends would describe me as a person who gets twice as much done as the average gal. Now, I think that's my whole family, but we're high energy. Sometimes to have a bipolar 2 diagnosis, you have to have had at least one incidence of hypomania. Hypomania is not the big high, it's under mania. But in my case, that was what was triggered by an antidepressant. So if an antidepressant triggers hypomania that you haven't had before, can be diagnostic of bipolar 2.
In terms of the split, are there more people diagnosed with bipolar 1? Is that even? I wonder if that's
a good question.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Ken, because of the film, we've had the privilege of interviewing all these people, and Dr. Roger McIntyre out of Toronto, he's highly respected, and he says 2 out of 3 people I treat with bipolar are actually bipolar 2 or on the bipolar spectrum. He says 2 out of 3 people with bipolar I treat do not have mania.
Wow.
And the statistics are something like 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4. So if you think about that and then multiply it by the number of people that are walking into their doctor's office with depression, which isn't classic clinical or classic major depression, which is like the other end of the spectrum with no mania at all, has a lot of misdiagnosed people walking around with the wrong drugs. By some accounts, it's up to 1 in 3 people who are diagnosed with depression actually have a form of bipolar depression.
Wow.
Yeah.
It just sounds like the misdiagnosis is out of control.
Huge. Yeah. And again, this is why we're so excited. And I felt like, the miracle of being better, the miracle of going from living hell to like the magnificence of a brain that works on planet Earth. I'm looking out now. It's a gorgeous summer day and the trees are like full bloom and the sunlight and the flowers. When you're depressed, you can't appreciate any of that. When you're bipolar depressed, you don't notice it. So the miracle of being on planet Earth with a brain that works and is grateful is such a huge blessing. Wouldn't you want anyone to have it who could? Opposed to incarceration, homelessness, addiction, devastation, suicide. Well, yeah, let's get that book out there. Let's get the film out there. Let's save some people's lives.
And why do you think it is that people who experience challenges with their mental health, why are they more likely to end up as addicts or incarcerated, like you just said?
You have to tell me that because that's your expertise. But I know that I was asked to give a talk at a pain and addiction summit. And I said, I'm not going to be the best person. Let's bring my beloved friend Amber, who tragically lost her husband to an opioid overdose, who the guy was a military hero and beautiful father and everything. And the tragic story with fentanyl that he didn't know was in there. But anyway, Amber's got to be the one that gives that talk because she's also a psych nurse. But as a result, and I supported her. I did a little bit of a talk. But as a result of that, we looked at statistics. And this better than me, but the vast majority of people with addiction, I think, have some form of mental health diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
So,
and
I think it's just, what are we going to do? We can't, the pain is too great. Like if I was an addictive personality in that way, I'm sure I would have been on the streets or something.
Yeah. Well, we look to self-medicate, don't we? Particularly if you're getting misdiagnosed and you're trying medications that are prescribed and they're not working. It's like
Yeah.
that helplessness of, well, what else can I do to manage my existence when everything and just living is so painful, so unbearable?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So how do we remove the
That's
stigma?
why, another reason why we have to remove the stigma, because people, as you know, this is your show, and I'm so happy to be on it, because people fearing the stigma will not get the help they need. And then they'll go to self-medicating or whatever. And you'll come on my podcast and I'll interview you about your story, which I'd love to hear another time. But so we say stigma kills, and you probably know the statistics on that better than I do, because people don't get the life-saving help. And I love this quote, Ash, you may or may not have heard it, from Terry Chaney, who wrote a book on mania. She's bipolar I. She says, the disease feeds on shame, shame feeds on silence, and it will not be silent anymore.
That's exactly right. There's so much. I just finished reading Dr. John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame That Binds You. And he's in recovery. He's gone through 12-step. And, you know, you just look at shame and how it underpins all of this, and how as long as there's shame attached and there's stigma, it almost continues to grow and fester and metastasize.
Yes.
And then, like Brene Brown says, we shine a light on the shame. We share what's going on with somebody who can hold space, who's empathetic, not sympathetic. And all of a sudden the shame dies because it can't survive.
That's
exactly right.
It dies in the light. It dies in the light. There's another person you should have on here, Dr. Devika Bhushan, and her podcast is Spreading the Light. She's Bipolar II. She was the acting Surgeon General of California, and came out last year at this time with an op-ed that said, I'm the Surgeon General of California and I'm bipolar. She did it to end the stigma.
Wow.
Yeah, I got a whole team of people I could send you.
I'd love that, because this is the thing at the end of the day, isn't it? It's until more of us come out and share our truth, like you did so beautifully on your TED Talk, and now with the book and the film, until, if you can't see it, how do you know? Like, one thing, I'm in 12-step recovery, and one thing that I will never underestimate is the power of identification. Seeing another person stand up there and say, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm struggling with this, and this is how I show up. This is how I get through it. It's that hope as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, in the case of bipolar, one of the shame lifters for me, so first was the stigma and the shame, and I wasn't going to publish that book because I was too scared. And my heart was pounding every time I try and press send. Scared of what? Somebody's going to kill you. Somebody's going to, I was going to lose my clients. I would lose friends, whatever, right? So my editor, Jennifer Margulies, bless her, she said, okay, this is a great book. This is what you're going to do. It needs to get out there. You're going to go home. This is your assignment. She likes to give me assignments, which I like. Write this. I'm bipolar and a better person because of it. So I wrote that essay, and it turned out to be 4 things, all of which you have, Ash, because I think it's probably the same if you come up from addiction or mental illness or any of them. The first one was emotional fearlessness. I've been to hell. You can't scare me. I will not leave you. Right? You've got that. I know you do. A next one, similarly, is compassion. There, but for the grace of God, I'd be on the streets or worse. I'm not going to judge you. Then there's discipline. We haven't talked about this too much, but I have a lot of health disciplines, physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual, that I do. And so I can help you with your self-care. Because my friends say, oh, you're my true north for self-care. Why? And I'm like, yeah, because you don't know what's on the other side of that. And then the last one's gratitude that we talked about. You've got like this endless gratitude, because every day that you're alive without the living in hell is a miracle. So that was de-shaming, to recognize those qualities. And I talked about that as bipolar pride, with all respect to LGBTQIA+. It's a different kind of pride, of coming out of a different kind of shame, right? And so that was lesson 1 of destigmatizing. Lesson 2 was publishing the book and thinking I was going to lose friends. Instead, so many people saying, thank you so much. My mother, my sister, my brother, my cousin, my nephew, my husband, we've been afraid to say, and you're showing us how to do it. And then the last thing, or most recent thing, was collecting people like Devika. meeting other people who are out with their bipolar, who are these hot ticket, amazing human beings. Feature on the film. There's Greg Martin, who commanded 10,000 troops in Iraq, Major General Greg Martin. There's Molly Kawahata, who was the youngest person to work in the White House and is an ice climber scaling mountains. There's, there's Heidi, who last name has escaped me at the moment, who was the quickest ever to win a Shark Tank. I don't know if you have Shark Tank down there.
Yeah, we do.
Real thing. Yeah. So she won like $500,000 on Shark Tank. So anyway, there's person after person. Paul English, the kayak app, the travel app that he sold for $1 billion with the B, bipolar. So starting to meet these people, like you said, it's a different kind of reflection. Oh,
yes.
I'm not just the one in the streets. I'm these people too. This is a cool tribe. I'll be part of that.
Yeah. I love that. Oh my gosh, there's so much greatness in all of that. And I too, I identify as being really proud that I'm an alcoholic in recovery. I don't shy away. There's a lot of debate around whether or not we should be using the term alcoholic. I absolutely lean into it because I think that to have this and to overcome it is something to be proud of. And like you touched on, that fourth gratitude, having gratitude for our experiences and then being able to share that and receiving messages from people whom either through listening to the podcast or hearing my story or someone else's story, they've found hope, they've found recovery. Like that's what we're here for. That's just the nectar of life, I think. So yeah, I have an abundance of gratitude.
I've known you all of 50 minutes, but I'm so proud of you, Ash, for what you
Thank
did
you.
to get to where you are.
Thank you.
That's hard work. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that. Sarah, I really want to touch on support networks, and you've come up with this fantastic, which you talk about in your TED Talk, the EMT or the Emergency Mental Health Team. But prior to that, I just want to go back to we touched on triggers very, very early on, and you were talking about how when you were going through pregnancy or post-pregnancy, there was a trigger there. What are some of the triggers that people need to be aware of with bipolar or bipolar II?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So I think it's kind of from the flip side because we know what we need to maintain for this not to happen. So one of the triggers is sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation is a disaster for a bipolar brain. You must sleep because circadian rhythms turn out to be maintaining steady circadian rhythms, important for everyone, but especially important for bipolar people. So we're very susceptible to staying up too late, getting up too late, missing the light, having that be inconsistent. So my beautiful child, who is now a gorgeous 21-year-old and fully healthy, but when she was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, before we knew she had a vascular ring wrapped around her trachea that was choking her, and everybody thought it was asthma, so she's up all night with breathing treatments with mom. So I was not getting any sleep, and this was a trigger that I didn't know. I didn't know that was dangerous because I didn't have my diagnosis yet. So would I do it again to keep her alive? Yes. But would I have help? Yes. So I wouldn't just be me, mom martyr, because she didn't want it mom, right? It would be dad. It would be 7 other relatives because we know that it would be important to keep patient number 1 healthy. So one is steady sleep. There's a whole study of circadian rhythm. So doing, eating at similar times, exercising at similar times, also an important piece that's a trigger is too much light too late at night. So I should keep them down here for these podcasts, but I have amber glasses that block out the blue light. If I'm going to be on the iPhone reading the New York Times after 8 o'clock at night, my amber glasses go on. And I've learned that from research that's very credible that if we do have too much light into the pineal gland, it doesn't send the signal to produce melatonin to get us to bed. So that screws you up, and that's bad for circadian rhythms. There's a huge connection between the gut-brain health connection. Do you know about that? The microbiome.
Yes.
There's a guy in Ireland who written a book called The Psychobiotic about it. He coined the psychobiotic. He's got 250 papers, a very highly esteemed Irish professor. And John Cryan is the guy if you want to look up that book, Psychobiotic. And there's a lot of information about healthy gut flora. So diversity of the microbiomes, so I eat my kombucha and drink my kombucha and eat my sauerkraut or whatever you do that you like for microbiome and try to stay away from, nasty processed foods. Some people will swear by a keto diet that it's extreme, I think, but for some people it saved their lives. Extreme, I mean, because it's very hard to keep up. That being only like zero carbs, but I think a low carb diet's good. So there's a bunch of those. If you flip them, what's good for you, if you flip them, those can be triggers if you don't do them.
Yeah, it sounds like just being really on top of all facets of your health. So diet, sleep, exercise, and then as you touched on earlier with your discipline around your self-care, like making that a priority as well.
Yeah.
So you shared that you do yoga. What are some other
Yep.
things that you do as a daily practice for self-care or weekly?
It's been so interesting with this research because we're finding out the science that backs up the practices. So one of the things, stress is a trigger. Stress is a trigger for a lot of things, but stress triggers inflammation, and inflammation can trigger basically the expression of bipolar genes, like a bipolar episode. So a lot of stress, like for me, it'd be 3 strikes and you're out. My brother would always say, and who knows what 3 strikes are? Something could be, it was a horrible client. And then I called them the client from hell, and then fell off a mountain, was terrifying and almost died. And then was trying to get pregnant and we're having trouble with fertility. And those 3 things, boom, 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 done. So stressor. So counter that, doing yoga first thing in the morning. You're a yoga teacher. Doesn't that just set you up good? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Like start your day calm instead of starting your day buzzed. I don't look at my email until I've done my yoga most days. And so, so I have my stress reduction kind of practices. A lot of people swear by meditation. I'm too restless to meditate. I don't do well sitting still, but I like to do movement meditation. Yoga is basically that. I have to get outside. Yes. The same guy, John Cryan, the Irishman, he says, move to the country and get a dog for stress reduction. Guess what I did?
Love that.
Years ago, I moved to the country and got a dog. I didn't know that that's what I was doing it. But living out here, like I go to the city, I love it. I got to get out of there in 2 days because there's too much for my sense of calm.
Your regulation.
3 days in New York. That's it. Love it. And go home to my woods.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Just creating those spaces where you can come back to center and be present and regulate your nervous system. I think, exactly. A beautiful way to start the day. Yeah, I'm a big
system regulation is key.
It's so important.
If I go on a trip or something, because circadian rhythms make time zone changes tough. So I don't think I can come visit you in Australia anymore, though I'd love to. You'll have to come. But
I can do that.
If I've been 3 hours west of California and I come back and I'm like feeling a little off, just a little off. Okay, what do? Back to basics. Get up at 6 with the sun, do your yoga, drink your water, go for a hike or a swim, eat a good breakfast, like slowly, just like re-regulate, nice and steady, and don't panic because these things work. So just take it one day at a time.
It's really interesting. I just went on my first big overseas trip since getting sober because I got sober at the very beginning of the pandemic. So the beginning of 2020. And I just had my first Europe holiday. I went over for my best friend's wedding in Hamburg and then Croatia, and I came back. And so it was 2 weeks. So a relatively quick trip for Europe from Australia.
Yeah.
But it was the first time that I hadn't drunk alcohol on the plane or used alcohol when I'd gotten home to self-medicate. And I cannot tell you how much better equipped I was to face the jet lag. So when I got home, yes, that first 24 hours was a little bit, I was out of whack with my circadian rhythm and my sleeping patterns, but I was able to bounce back so much faster than any other previous holiday I'd had where I'd been drinking. And like you said, I really stuck to my routine. So even though it didn't feel natural to get up at 6 a.m. and get outside and get light into my eyes, I got up and I really got back into my rhythm within a time period that had I still been drinking alcohol would have taken me a week or 2. Whereas this was like 24 hours and everyone was saying, are you jet lagged? And yeah, it was fine.
That's terrific. That's great. You reminded me about the getting your light in your eyes. Dr. Phelps, when asked, the most important thing to maintain circadian rhythms is to get up at the same time, to get up with the sun, like not with the sun this time of year, it's 5 a.m. or something, but 6:30 and getting light in your eyes. And then when it gets darker for us, it'll be November, December, which is like the worst, right? Probably what is for you now. When it's dark till 8 or 9 in the morning, there's something called a dawn simulator. And you get the dawn simulator. It costs $30 on Amazon or whatever the Australian equivalent is. and you set it for 6 or 6:30 and the light comes up slow. So,
oh, I love the sound of that.
Yeah.
That sounds brilliant. So, Sarah, as we touched on earlier, you have created this really fantastic acronym for people who are wanting to know how to support somebody who is experiencing bipolar. You do explain it in detail in the TED Talk, so I won't ask you to go into heaps of detail here today, but it is the Emergency Mental Health Team. Can you just outline for people listening, what are some of the key things? Well, what does that stand for?
Okay, so I just call it the EMHT, Emergency Mental Health Team, because EMT is emergency medicine. But there's
That's
4
it.
things. All my things are acronyms. I mean, all my things are 3 or 4 because I used to be a consultant, and so I can't help it. I have to have models. But we've touched on some of this already. Ash, I think you said the difference between empathy and sympathy. So the first thing I just say is show up and don't try to fix it. You can't. Just accompany this person with your love. They are on an island of despair and isolation, and your presence makes a world of difference. Don't try to fix it. But then I go, for those of you who do need something to do, like the doers, here's what you can do. They can't choose peanut butters. So what we were saying before, pick up the kids, take them to the dentist, understand how difficult the cognitive breakdown is, and you do that. And then you got to get a posse because you can't do this alone. You will be exhausted and you'll be overwhelmed. So get a group of people. But the great thing about that is that when you need it, that community is going to be there for you.
That's beautiful. Thanks for outlining that. I think just having some really clear cut direction on how to navigate this, because with my own experience as well, even with addiction, is I think sometimes when people don't know what to do, they don't do anything. Exactly. And they lean back almost because they're afraid of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But particularly like you said, lean in.
I came up with that after the book came out, and people were coming to me going, I feel like a deer in the headlights. I don't know what to do. I feel so guilty about my sister-in-law, help. So that's when I thought about those 4 things. Yeah. So you can help out there. You can help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Everyone can help.
And the main thing is show up. Don't expect them to call you. They won't. You have to knock on the door. You have to pick up the phone because they're not going to do it. They are ashamed, and they think that you'd be better off without them. Even if you're their best friend, they think, nope, she doesn't want to be with me, or I'm just going to waste your time. So anyway, you got to show up.
Oh, it's such a powerful.
Make a phone call. Just knock on the door. They're not going to call you.
Yeah, I've had direct experience with this actually recently. Somebody I know was really struggling, and my first instinct, which was so, I'm going to say selfish, and I don't mean that in a negative term. I just mean that I was coming from a place of self-centeredness in that I thought I'd done something wrong to make them pull away.
Oh.
And then, the months down the track, the light was shed on what was really going on for this person, and I realized it had nothing to do with me. Yeah. And in that moment, what they really needed was for me to lean in.
Exactly. And, I even make this mistake. I have a friend who's suffering from depression quite a bit. And I say to him, hey, Paul, just call me if you need me. And then I'm like, take your own medicine, girl. He's not going to call you. You have to text him. You have to call him. You got to knock on the door. You got to ask him to go for a walk with you. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Sarah, I've gotten so much out of our conversation today, and I really can't thank you enough for the incredible work that you're doing currently. There's one final question that I love to ask my guests, so I'm going to ask you that now. The question is, Sarah, what are your 3 non-negotiables that allow you to live your life today happy, joyous, and free?
Well, to your point, this might sound selfish, but non-negotiable is self-care. I have to do it. Because what's at risk if I don't? But, like my family knows that they're going to support mom in that because, we want to keep her healthy. One example I didn't share before about behaviors, I take an afternoon power nap, 18 minutes I did right before this. And,
great.
You got to take your power nap. It's huge. There's all sort of data about that too. But when they were little, we used to call it the 3 F's nap. F, what are the F's? Flood, fire, or fatality. You don't wake up mom unless it's one of those 3 F's. Not the 3 F's. And then they'll go, no, dad, mom's on 3 F's. Don't bug her.
I love it. That's
So
awesome.
self-care is, I think, number 1, number 2, and number 3. Even
Beautiful.
like if I'm with a group and, they need to do, I don't know what they're doing. They need to like, go have a beer and I haven't done my hike yet. I got to do my hike first. It's like, I'm just, you cannot, you have to put yourself first. And that's going to be the best thing that you can do for everybody you love.
And it's that old saying, isn't it? You can't give from an empty cup. So make sure your own cup is full first, and then you can re-enter the world and be the best version of yourself. Sara, once again, thank you so much. People listening today, I'm sure they're going to want to track you down and find out more. So where can they go?
Well, thank you, Ash. I would love them to read the book. It's getting beautiful reviews. It reads like a novel, they say. I'm having a lot of beautiful reviews on Amazon. Maybe you'll show that. But anyway, you got to look up Sara Schley, Brainstorm, the way my name is spelled, and you'll find it on Amazon. You can't just put Brainstorm because there's other brainstorms, but Sara Schley Brainstorm. You can go to my my website, which is my name, saraschley.com, which is the website for the book, and you can find all kinds of cool stuff there, and it'll link to my YouTube channel. And then for the film, it's called brainstormthefilm.com. And if you go to brainstormthefilm.com, if you're interested in that, our team is there, our experts are there. We've interviewed 40 experts so far, including those 2 Australians, and our vision. And there's a link to my TED Talk, and there's a link to the kind of teaser for the film. So that's brainstormthefilm.com. So maybe you'll put both of those in the show notes.
I absolutely will. I'm going to pop every book that you've mentioned today in the show notes, along with all of your details. Once again, Sara, thank you. We say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one needs suffer in silence. So thank you once again for being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Ash, for your brilliant work.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you next time.